Hi, my name is Judy and I'm the City Stitcher, and welcome to my Flosstube channel. Today is Sunday, September the 20th. I always want to say August, so I'm having to work really hard at remembering that we're in September. And it has been generally a sunny day. It's starting to cloud over a little bit, but it started out sunny, which means, as usual, this room is really lovely, and so I'm enjoying that. I hope where you are that the weather is not too bad. For some of you, you might be in some of those locations where the weather is not great. So I will do my regular safety first, safety first, safety first. Other than that, I hope everybody's doing well. As you can tell by the title of this week's episode, we're doing Stitcher's Math again. I know, not everybody's favorite subject, but it's September. The kids have all gone back to school, and I, with my great family teaching history, have decided that we're going to learn something this month. Similar to last week, I will be putting the math episode at the end of the video, so if you really don't want to have anything to do with math, you can shut it off before we hit the math stuff. But doing a little bit more math, again, in response to questions that I see get asked regularly. We'll talk about some of the responses that I tend to see online and why I'm choosing to do it, but we'll do that once we get to the end. So with that, we're going to get on with what I have to show you this week. So I have several things to discuss, but, you know, recap, welcome to September, otherwise known as Sampler September, Serendipity September, Start It September, or as I like to call it, Marbeck September. Technically also Serendipity designs, but I'm really focusing primarily on one project, which, if you are returning, thank you for coming back. You know what this is about. If you're new to my channel, thank you for spending some time with me, and I hope you enjoy what you see. And if you do, please like and subscribe this video, and feel free to put any comments, questions. I'm going to have some questions for you guys down in a little later in the episode for you to respond to, but with that, let's get on with the stitching. So, Marbeck Nativity, again, I know, big surprise. 2021 goals. Marbeck's done in 2020, and I get to stitch all the new things in 2021. But yes, I'm still on the bottom part of the center panel. Yes, I wish I stitched faster than I do, but we are where we are, and we are making progress, which is something that I always keep telling myself, even when I go, man, you've not made it very far. I keep going, you're making progress, and every stitch that you get into this thing is a stitch closer to the finish. So just keep that in mind. So where did I get to this week? Well, I kind of had a plan last week, and I didn't exactly follow through on the plan, and I'll tell you why. So here's where I'm at. So I was hoping to have Joseph completely finished, and he's not completely finished. His outlining is not done, and he's got a little bit right here that is not done. And then, probably really hard to tell, is there's a little bit here which is not stitched, and a little bit over here which is not stitched. Want to know why that is? It's because it's Kreinik. I know. I was very surprised at my reaction, because I was like, good grief, I made it through the star. Surely I've gotten through my Kreinik phobia, you know, not wanting to do it. I can handle it. I've proven I can do it. I've done the whole star, and I still got to these parts of Joseph, and I went, oh my goodness, it's Kreinik. I don't want to do it. And so I didn't, for a couple of reasons. One, because I was surprised at my reaction. I went, okay, let's not scare me off of this. So there's some Kreinik in Joseph. There's Kreinik around baby Jesus. There's Kreinik in Mary. Mary's going to be a topic for a different day. But what I decided to do is I needed to do more of the manger here, and then I would do the Kreinik, because again, the Kreinik in the manger is generally around here, so I was going to try to do it while I did the the part around his coat. So that's what I talked myself into. It took all of about, 2.5 seconds to talk myself into that approach, that was a better decision. I still filled in some of the colors. There were a few colors left to go in here, and I filled in the rest of his head covering. So my goal for this week is I want to finish, I want to finish the manger here, get the last little bit of Joseph done, get the Krynic done, and get Joseph outlined. So that is my task for this week. Manger, Krynic, Joseph outlining. So theoretically that when I come see you next week, we'll be moving somewhere more over here, which will be a discussion for that week. So some progress. These are the points where I look at it and I go, compared to how much I felt like I got progress on Joseph in the previous week, because like I started with virtually nothing. I had a little bit of his head and then like boom, there was Joseph. I don't feel like I got as much accomplished. This is one of the pros and cons of not keeping track of stitches and stuff like that. So I don't know how many stitches I stitched in the previous week versus how many got stitched this week. But technically there is progress here. And not surprisingly, the amount of stitches that it's going to take to do the manger is less than any of these things. So theoretically, that should be a very achievable goal this week. I've got a little bit of a busy week this week, so a few more things on the calendar than I had originally thought I was going to have. But still, theoretically, I should be able to get that done. So that is the update on Marbeck, and so thank you to all of you who have sent in the nice comments about cheering me on about continuing with Marbeck. Man, I think we're all going to be happy when that thing is done. It will look lovely at the end, and that's what I keep reminding myself. It's going to look great at the end, and I'm going to feel like I really accomplished something. Anyway, there's still a lot more to go on that. We can talk about that on a different week. So that's that one. And so last week I showed you that I had finished my mini autumn block. And so I didn't start something new, but as a friend of mine reminded me, I'd actually accomplished 3 of the things from my Mania starts, my Stitch Sania version of Mania. So 3 out of the 5 had been completed, so I felt that I should maybe continue on with one of my other ones. And so the one that I chose, now that I had finished autumn, was, regress back a season, because, the temperatures are getting cooler, the leaves are turning and falling, it's windier, grayer, all those things. So clearly that is the time to stitch summer. I know, anyway, it's me. So I went back to the one that I'd started from Shepherd's Bush called Summer Notes. Now, if you look at this carefully, not that you probably have very good memories, because I have a terrible memory when I'm watching Flosstube. Sometimes I can't even remember who it was that I was watching, but there is less stitching here than there was the last time you saw it. And so what did I spend my time doing? I spent my time ripping out the lake. And I will say it took me a lot longer to rip out the lake than I thought it was going to take. So I thought I could easily rip it out and then start restitching it before I was here, and well, that didn't happen. I essentially got it ripped out. Why did I rip it out? Because after all of this time, and if you go way back to May and you look at those videos and I was talking about this, I was not very happy with the called for color for the lake, particularly the version of the thread that I had when I stitched it up. It looked totally fine when I, had it assigned to the project, and I went, that'll be fine. Stitched it up and went, oh, I don't know that this is very good. And then I went, it's just because you've looked at it too long. I hauled this out and went, no. No. It can't stay. You will never like this. This is the wrong color. You need to change this. So rip it out. I went. Now, The hard part is I don't feel like I quite have the solution to what the correct color for the lake should be. So this is where all of you come back into play again. So if you've ever stitched with an over dyed thread, because I do like the tonality, there's enough stitches in here that you will get some variegation. Now, I don't think I want dramatically variegated. I do want some subtle, but I don't know. If you've stitched something that has water that you've used a variegated for that you think looks great, and again, I'm thinking lake as opposed to Caribbean Ocean or that kind of stuff, and you'll see that in a minute. Feel free and please put it in the comments down below if you've got a good color suggestion for that. For a couple of my friends who are infamous for trying to talk at me while they're watching my Flosstube, please don't forget that when you watch this and you talk to me while you're watching it, I can't actually hear you. So if you've got great suggestions, you do need to put them down in the comments below so I can actually have a shot at hearing you. So what I did is I went to my stash and I pulled a bunch of different colors, and even when I brought them downstairs, some of them I went, maybe not, I don't know. So let's start with what was the original called for color. So the original called for color for the lake is Weeks Dye Works Blue Heron. And so that's what Blue Heron looks like. So technically it didn't look too bad, but it really does look like a very, like you're at the cabin by the lake when it's a very gray, dark day, which is not really the thing that I think of when I go, ooh, summer at the cabin. Summer notes, there's sunshine and bees in this pattern, and to have this really dark gray lake didn't work for me. So, stitched it, frogged it, and now we're in the hard part, which is the choosing. So my next pick, which I've pulled out, is Weeks Dye Works Jaybird. But again, there's a part of, now again, the colors never show up really well when you're filming any of these things. So there is variegation in here. It was interesting. I was watching something from Kathy Haberman from Hands On Design. She was doing a floss toss, and she said, it's really nice when you do a floss toss, but then you have to like strip it down because what you're going to end up stitching with is not that big, thick. It's not going to be, you know, this chunk of a color. You're going to be stitching with 2 strands, which I went, it's a fair point, and I do tend to do that myself. I tend to strand the stuff down just so I can see how things are looking. So for example, on this one of my concerns is that it ends up being too pale. So that's 2 strands of that. So bluer than what was there before, but still not convinced, not sure. And I don't want to have to stitch this thing 4 or 5 times because that'll really make me annoyed. So that's one of the options. Option number 2, because again, I felt maybe that one was a little too gray. So this is Weeks Dye Works Union Blue. So again, I would say that that's not doing it justice. It's brighter than that. So again, if you come in and you do the 2-strand test, and again, part of the draw is that there is variegation in here. So I'm just got a little twisty there on me. Okay. So that's what 2 strands of that looks like. So I'm going, I think this is a better option, is where I'm at right now. And then I went, well, maybe it still needs to be paler, maybe? So this is Ship's Manor April Showers. So okay, this is the full-on. I think it's heading towards, I think it's a little too bright. So I feel like it's heading towards the territory that it's similar in color to the shirt that I'm wearing today. Which, while I like the color, isn't necessarily the color that I associate with water and lakes where I am. Again, so here's where that, if you strand it down, see, and that's where it gets hard, right? Because when I look at that, I go, that's not too bad. Does it need to be more intense? I don't know. What do you think? I'm having a hard time. And because I'm indecisive and I can't make up my mind, I went, well, maybe you're working too hard at the blue. Now, I don't want green water, like green water, because I feel like that means like algae and slime and disgusting things. And you can't go too Caribbean-esque, again, because I don't really think of cabin in that context. But maybe, I was like, maybe you're trying too hard to go into the blue range. And so what I pulled out, so this is, I know you'll laugh, Weeks Dye Works Ocean. So this is the full kettle of fish. So again, just making it a little more teal-y. And let's just take off the two strands of this one. Gotta love when the floss fights back. And so, and again, so when I strand it down and I've only got the two strands, again, I don't think it's showing up very well, but that's me looking at the camera from this angle, so who knows. That's where I go, like, maybe not bad, maybe not too far. I don't know. Thoughts, opinions? Again, this is the chart. So, I mean, we will be ending up having like these blue flowers up here, which theoretically are done in the same color as the lake. Does that mean I have to do them in that color? Of course not. Am I totally willing to change those? You bet. I don't know. Anyway, thoughts, opinions, put them down in the comments below. But if nothing else, I've ripped the thing out. And so I'm ready to make a decision and choose what I think is the better color for water for this particular piece. I don't know. So Ocean is this one, Union Blue is that one. I don't know. Wade in, have a vote. Check back next week when I'll have worked on it and gone with something that isn't even an option here. Who knows? Anyway, so those are my stitching tasks for the week. So some actual honest to goodness stitching, some unstitching, and some pulling of floss and thinking about things. As I tend to do, let's talk about a free chart. So this week I'm going to talk about modern folk embroidery. So they've got a couple of free charts. There's, I think, 3 free charts on their site right now. I've only pulled down the pictures for 2 of them. So let's talk about it. So one is this one that says, it's better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. So again, could be just done in a monochromatic. They show it as white done on black, but again, you could do any color of your choosing. You could do variegated, you could do whatever you want. I think the sentiment is great. So there's that one. And then Let's Be Kind, which sadly, when you watch the news, yes, I think this is something that society these days needs to stop and have a little bit of a pause. You don't always know what's going on in somebody else's life. Even though they could be doing horrendous things to you and, you know, whatever. Sometimes I go, you don't know exactly what's going on in their life that's causing them to be like that. But, and don't get me wrong, it's easy to say and sometimes really hard to put into practice. I also acknowledge that. But I think it's a good reminder. And again, similar to all the other ones, pick any color of your choosing, variegated, single, monochromatic, 8 different colors, open to interpretation. And I also like that optionality around designs like that. So those are 2 of the 3 free ones that they have on their site. I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of other things that they do. So they, similar to the stitch-alongs that I talked about last week with linen and threads, Modern Folk Embroidery does also do a year-long stitch-along. Theirs is not free, so you do have to pay for the chart. I want to say it comes out once a month, but I could be wrong on that. And you know, once you get to the end of the year, you can just buy all of it in one shot. You can also buy parts of them as well. So when you go to the site, if you're looking at one of them and you go like, I didn't necessarily want to do all of it, you can buy the parts to get to the part that you want to stitch. You know, haven't focused on that quite so much for me. But for example, so this is one of the ones that they did that I like. I haven't gotten it yet, only because, you know, I have 1,200 things going on. So this is the one from 2018, and it had the 4 different seasons. Now the interesting thing about this is that because these are all the same size, you can arrange the seasons in the order that you want them. So you don't have to start with winter here. You could put spring here or summer here on. You can arrange them however you want because the seasons are the same size and they all fit within the border. And again, so they show it as a monochromatic. I know when I was watching this being stitched, when people were working on this stitch along, that people were changing them up and doing them in different colors and, you know, choosing a really variegated for like the border around them, but choosing a variegated so that they could, you know, there was a primary color for each of the seasons that they then sort of took off with and made each of the 4 seasons. So it still looked like it all went together. Hey, take some planning, appreciate the artisticness that some people were doing when they were doing that. You know, and again, as I've said many times before, I am not good with a mystery. I don't like the mystery aspect. I don't want my pattern to be a mystery. I need to know what my pattern is for that very reason. So if I wanted to choose a very specific type of border, I would have needed to have seen what each of these seasons was looking like so I could decide what I thought the right color was and then go find the variegated and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, hence I struggle with mysteries. I think it's great that there are people who love them. I am really great for sailing in at the tail end, acquiring the pattern, and then still taking another, you know, 7, 12, 15 years before, you know, I start to do anything with it. Anyway, so that's an example of their stitch-alongs. So they do have a 2020 stitch-along. Their previous stitch-alongs, like I say, are available on their website. So, you know, you wouldn't have to get this in pieces. You could just buy all of this. But I think the way the patterns are on there, and again, I didn't look closely at this because I actually like all of it. I think the patterns are on there so that if you just liked one of the seasons, you can get just the season or the couple of seasons that you like. So there are parts that you don't have to get the whole thing. You can get them in pieces. So that's their stitch alongs. But because I'm the queen of Christmas and I tend to go for, you know, Christmassy things, although, you know, there is a limit to how much Christmas I could possibly ever put up in my house. That's anyway. I keep telling myself it's okay to stitch them even if you have no place to put them. So again, so fairly simple. Tidings of joy. Nice little scene, snow. Again, the way they show it is this white on a sort of charcoaly gray background. But again, you can change this to what you want. You don't have to do it on gray. You could do it on, actually I'm just looking at this going like, you could put it on that basalt gray fabric. Anyway, change some of the, anyway, whatever, la la la. I shouldn't get excited. I don't have time in 2020 to do this because I'm working on Marback. Anyway, you know, so they do have a wide variety. They have samplers, they have reproductions, they've got their stitch alongs. Anyway, just another designer, a couple of free patterns for you to have a look at. If you like them, you know, my encouragement, download them while you can get them. They're not always guaranteed to be there. And again, I had a moment where it's like I thought I had seen something else that I thought was one of their free ones, but again, as I said last week, I literally, before I come to record these, I go back online and go, okay, make sure that your free one is actually still there and is a free chart, because it's not going to look good if you go, here's your free chart, and everybody goes, what are you talking about? I can't find it anywhere. Anyway, so those are there. You do have to put them into a cart and pretend like you're going through a checkout, but of course, because they're free, you don't have to provide any payment information. So just some of them, you just go and you can download them straight from there. These you have to put into a cart and theoretically hit checkout, but you don't have to put any payment information to get them. They just show up while you're still there. They don't email them to you. They show up in your cart. Anyway, that's Modern Folk Embroidery. Again, the links to those directly to where their free charts are will be in the notes below, so that you can go and have a look at those, and feel free to look at some of their other charts. And with that, if you aren't staying for the math lesson this week, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for spending some time with me. I hope you have a good week, and I look forward to seeing you next week. If you're staying for the math, here we go. Similar to last week, don't worry, there's no test. You don't need a calculator, you don't need to do anything, no pop quizzes, no homework, none of the scary things that made math, you know, not fun for many people while they were in school. I'm just here to explain a few things. So with that, I've chosen something very specific to use as my example for what we're going to do the math on, because you'll recognize it. Now, brace yourself. I haven't done anything with this since the last time you saw it, but I thought it would be fun to use the math for this one because it highlights a couple things. Oh, we haven't seen her in a long time. I know. We need to get back to this one too. So this is Fairy Winter Dream by Nora Corbett, done on a 28 count Midnight Tryst Jobelin by Fabrics from Stephanie. Love this fabric. Love, 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 love. But cannot get distracted with this gloriousness and hurry up and finish it up because I have to finish Marbeck first. There will be time for this one to get finished, but I think she looks lovely. So this is what we're using as our sample that we're going to do the math on for the math lesson. And so the math lesson has to do with, and again, this comes up all the time in all sorts of groups. This is the project I'm doing. Somebody tell me how much fabric I need to buy. Now, I get that math is hard for people, and I get that math was actually, for some people, the whole math experience in school was so traumatic that they're absolutely in the I can't do math and don't ask me to do math. I'm not successful. Anyway, I'm saying everybody can do math. We just have to explain it in a way that everybody understands, that everybody can do it. It may never become your favorite thing to do. And I'm not the one to talk to about that, because my whole working career has had things to do with math and numbers, so I'm not that person. But I do have friends who, you know, not so good, really don't like it, don't want to do it. But everybody can. And so I just want to explain how this works, because usually when I find somebody asking the question, like even on some floss tubes, you know, they go, oh, well, you just do this and you divide by this and then you add this and like, so it'll be this. And I go, like, for the person who's not mathematically inclined, they have no hope of catching on to what you did to get to the final answer. And some people go, well, just use one of the online calculators. But even there, some people find them hard to use to come up with what they want to do. And we're going to talk about why that happens as well. So with that, let's start with the math lesson. Here comes the infamous whiteboard. I feel very, very teacherly like with my, you know, eraser and my multicolored pens. Okay, so there might be some teaching background here that's coming to the forefront, even though I don't do it as a career. So, how do we figure out what the correct size of fabric is to do Fairy Winter Dream? Here's the chart. So we're going to go right from the chart. And so on all of the charts somewhere, generally, unless you've got a really old chart, because I do have some really old charts where there actually is no stitch count on it, but usually somewhere on your chart it says what the stitch count is. And so Fairy Winter Dream is 118 stitches wide by 147 stitches high. So it shows up in the pattern just like this, 118W by 147 high. 118 stitches wide by 147 high. So this is, so step number one, so the original model for this was stitched on 32 count Ocean Kiss linen. And so that's where we're going to do math set number one. So if you're doing it on a 32 count, watch this. I'm going to say whether you're doing it on a 16 count Aida, or, see, I already need my thing. There we go. Or a 32 count linen. The math is the same for whether you're doing it on 16 or 32, because in this, you're doing it over 1, and this, you're doing it over 2 threads. And so 32 divided by 2 is 16. So this is why people talk about 16 and 32 count fabric being the same, because it will result in a project that ends up in the same size. So you could do it on 16 count Aida, you could do it on 32 count linen. If you do it over 2, these will end up being the same size. And so what you do, so either way, you're going to take the 118 and you're going to divide it by 16 for either of these, which is equal to, I did the math, 7.375. We're just going to stop there for a second, because now we're going to do the height. So 147 divided by 16 is equal to 9.1875. I'm giving you all the digits only because if you ever did it on a calculator, I want you to see the same thing I'm doing. So what that means is that the design size for the actual part that you're stitching is going to take 7.375 inches by I'm calling it 9.2. Now, is that where you stop? No, because if that's the piece, if you cut your fabric to exactly this size, you will only have just enough to actually get your stitch design onto that piece of fabric. You would have nothing left to do anything with it once it was done. And so this is where people talk about the things. Then you have to add 3 on all sides. And this is where people get confused when they go 3 on all sides. So here's my design. I need 3 up here, 3 on that side, which means to your height, you're going to add a total of 6. 3 for this, 3 for that. So I'm going to add 6, which is going to take me to 15.1875. And then you're going to add 3 inches out this way and 3 inches out that way. And the combination of this and that is another 6. So now you have 13.375 and 15.1875. Now you're just going to love this because we're going to go back and we're going to view last week's lesson. It's always what a good teacher does. Let's bring in the lesson from last week. So what happens is if you bought a piece of fabric that was 13.5 inches by 18 inches, which is otherwise known as a wide eighth, that's last week's lesson, right? You can fit your design on that piece of fabric. Now, this, you're going to need all of this width of the 13.5. You're going to have a couple of inches. Would I bother cutting it off? No, because the difference in this, like what are you going to do with a slightly less than 3-inch strip? Unless you've got something that hey, there are people who are really frugal and crafty and can do things with something that's less than 3 inches. I'm not one of those people. I would take a wide eighth and say that this fits on that. So that's if you're doing it on 16 count. Now, do you have to do it on 16 count? Of course not. You could choose to do it on 14 count. So again, 14 count, people talk about 14 and 28 the same. Again, one of them is over 1, one of them is over 2. But it works out the same. So let's do the math again on 14 count. So again, if you take 118 and you divide it by 14, it's going to give you 8.4. And 147 divided by 14 is going to give you 10.5. Then we're going to add our 6, which gets you to 14.4, gets you to 16.5. Now this is where it gets a little interesting, because then you go, does this still fit on a wide eighth? Well, it depends. So your 18, you're going to be fine here, right? However, the 13.5 is slightly less than your number here of 14.4. Is that necessarily a problem? Well, it depends on what you're doing with it, and it depends on, for example, if you're getting it framed, what your framer does. So you'll need to know your framer, or potentially have that discussion with your framer and see what they do. So the reason why everybody, where the 6 comes from and the 3, is generally people are telling you to add the 3 onto each of the sides so that you have enough for framing. So that can give you a little bit of space beyond your design size and enough fabric for you to sort of loop it over the end and lace it or glue it, or whatever it is that your personal choice is for how you do attach the fabric to the back to keep it in place. So when you come down here, so you're a little bit shy, so you're an inch less than what you would probably like. But an inch divided by 2, because you've got 2 sides here, gives you, so instead of having 3 inches on each of these sides, you'd have 2.5 inches. Is that horrible? No, I think it's manageable. but only you know what you're planning on doing with your project to see if this is going to work. So let's talk about a couple of other things. So one of the reasons why people get confused about the calculator is, so one of them has to do with adding the dimensions for these 3 inches on each of the sides. Now, if you're turning your project into a wall hanging or a pillow or whatever, you may not need 3. Now, I am not the person for you to ask that question to, because I don't do any of that stuff, and don't ask me. If you know how to do that stuff, you're way better. You know better than I do what that number is. 3 probably is a lot more than you really need. How much less than the 3 do you need if that's what you're doing with it? Assess what you think you're going to do with it at the end and make that determination, but you may not need the 3. One of the other things that happens is when you've got your design size, so I'm just going to go back and go. So let's pretend this is our design. Here's my lovely little fairy. And that's as much of the fairy as I'm going to draw, because that's my best. That's my best version of the fairy. Just go with that. So one of the things that happens is, if you were doing a full coverage piece like a Haid, you would probably frame right up to the edge, right? So whether it's a mat or a molding, you would probably do it right up to the edge. Why? Because you've got this really intensely stitched piece, right? And so you don't generally need, like, that's the picture. It's not the picture plus fabric. But for something like Fairy Winter Dream on mine, one of the things that I took into consideration when I was cutting my fabric is to say, I love this fabric. I love how this fabric looks. And I think it's, you know, so would I necessarily, so this is the far edge of here, would I necessarily want to bring a mat and put it right up against that, frame right to the edge? Probably not. Why? Because I would want my fairy to breathe a little bit. So I would probably leave fabric around, even past the design. Now, how much that would be, can't tell you at this point, but I could easily see me leaving that, you know, that much, you know, on all of the sides, just to give it maybe a little bit more, depending on how, once I get the wings in and the shading and what this looks like, before I would start putting a mat around it. Now, that's my personal preference. That's what that's what I would do. Is that necessarily your choice, your aesthetic? Not necessarily, only you know. But for me, when I was cutting this, I was cutting it off of a different piece, so I had a couple of math things to do. But I have left, this is more than 3 inches. Why? Because I wanted to allow myself to give me more breathing room around my piece and still have fabric for my framer to wrap it around mat and do things with it to get it for framing. Now, how much of that I'm really going to need, I don't know. But for me, and again, I've seen other people do that, where you'll see them on Flosstubes where they go, there's a lot more fabric here, but I don't want to cut it down till I've made sure that I get around the whole border, that I've, you know, whatever. And I can see that. But I cut my piece off and I went, yes, I'm giving myself, you know, more room than I would normally, you know, more than the 3 inches. Why? Because I think I'm going to want to leave a decent amount before we get to the molding or matting or whatever it is that I'm going to end up choosing to do with this. Framed, yes. What it's going to look like, what I'm going to choose to do for the framing options, That's up for debate. So, but again, so when you go back and you do your math and you're looking at, you know, do I add 6? I don't know. Have I been known at times to add 8? Sure. Is that fabric dependent? Absolutely. And again, this is where you get into things. Do you necessarily need the 6? Maybe not. Maybe you only need 2 on each of these dimensions, which means you'd be adding 4. Again, it depends on what how you think you're going to end up finishing it, what the fabric is, what the project is. Again, as I said, like if you're doing a height or a full coverage piece of some kind, you know, you may be wanting to frame right up against it, which means, you know, again, talking to your framer if you're getting it framed, or making it into a pillow or a wall hanging or a bell pull or whatever it is. If you're not doing the finishing yourself, talk to the person that you think is going to be doing the finishing for you, and they can tell you what they're comfortable working with. Now, all sorts of framers have tricks of the trade about what they do if someone comes in and they didn't leave enough fabric. Hey, my answer is build a relationship with your framer of choice, and then they'll be quite frank with you about what they find easiest, what gives them the most flexibility around options once you bring your piece in to be framed. Have those conversations. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If they don't want to deal with your questions, that's probably not the finisher that you necessarily want to be taking your stuff to. Just my opinion. Anyway, so there is your math lesson for the week. I hope you can read that. It will be interesting when I go back and I watch this video. Hopefully I'll be able to read it. If I can't read it, well, sorry, this won't be this week's best video. But that's the math lesson for this week. And with that, I hope that you all have a really good week. I hope that you all stay safe. I hope that you all find time to do some stitching and that you can find some peace and enjoyment and calm with your stitching. Have a good week, guys.